Assalamu alaikum, everyone. All right, let's get started, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to episode 4 of Faithful Healing with Hannah. SubhanAllah, the fact that it's already been an entire month of this podcast. For those of you guys who have been regular watchers, for those of you guys who are even new, thank you guys so much for joining, inshallah, today. And we have an exciting episode for you guys. On today's episode, we have a sister who got herself into a very, very sticky situation. And she's asking us how to help her with a woman and how to move forward. Another viewer is asking, when is it time to give up? Give up on your dua, give up on your hope for better things. And the final submission today is about, can you fix your parents? All of that and more today on Faithful Healing. So, if you are new here, Assalamu alaikum and welcome. We're so excited to have you here. My name is Hannah, and on this show, I try to help Muslims just like yourself navigate tough situations through my experience as a trauma coach and self-improvement coach. If you'd like to submit any questions to be posted on the show, then please know that there is a link in the description of every episode where you can submit your questions. If your question is selected, you'll get an email notifying you. Otherwise, please chat it up in the chat box as usual. Give your salam if you're watching this live. Let me know where you're tuning in from, inshallah, what state or what country you are tuning in from. And like usual, we have a TikTok of the day to share with you guys all. So let's watch that together.
Somebody asked me, they say, well, what if we reach out to the person that we haven't spoke to in months? So, Assalamu alaikum. Somebody asked me, they say, well, what if we reach out to the person that we haven't spoke to in months or etc. and their response is negative? All we can do is pray that Allah soften their heart, give them a mind of understanding. But we don't let other people's actions dictate ours. That's what makes the deen unique. When we're able to be positive in negative situations. So despite how someone responds, or if they respond or not, just know you have done a good deed. Alhamdulillah, that's all that matters. And Allah sees that. He sees that you took time and you was able to reach out, something that Shaitan didn't want you to do. So never let one's actions dictate yours. Assalamu alaikum.
I love that video. It's so simple, it's so straightforward, but I came across it on TikTok randomly and I was like, subhanAllah, the fact that this brother, I've never met him, I have no idea who he is, but the fact that he was able to articulate something so powerful from a self-improvement point of view that so many of us struggle with in such simple terms, truly, truly, truly demonstrates the beauty of our deen, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Islam and sent the Prophet Islam to the rest of mankind, meaning the language of it, the principles of it are things that people of all different levels can understand. It was sent to the most prominent and wealthy of the people of the Quraysh, and at the same time, the Bedouins, the nomads, who were very rough and tough, very, education was not as robust, were also able to practice and understand deed. He is talking about autonomy. Autonomy, you guys, is something I stress so much in my trauma group coaching program. We talk about autonomy all the time because ultimately, when life, even if all the circumstances of life stay the same, what is the one independent factor that we have control over? It's us. It's what we do. We have the decision-making power of what we do. And when we hold that power and we don't give it away, we do decide to do what is better no matter what. That is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us that steadfastness, that ability to say, hey, this stuff ain't right. I'm not interested in moving towards haram. I want a better life for myself. And even though all seems bleak and people are going to tell me that I'm not able to get out of the situation I'm in, I know that with the proper effort, the proper dua, and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessing, that I will be able to do that. So we'll, just send a thank you to that brother for sharing that really sweet reminder to us. And especially for those of you guys, I mean, again, if you're new here, I see that there's some people who are watching live. Give some salam in the chat box and let us know, inshallah, where you're watching from. But he was talking specifically about the idea of reaching out and reconciling with people. Now, please remember that in Islam, you don't have a requirement to forgive. You don't. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some point in one of these questions. There are a lot of questions about issues or interpersonal relationship issues. You don't have to forgive someone wholeheartedly, but the reality of it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that it is better, and that when we do forgive someone who harmed us, even though we don't have to, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness towards us that we might attain through that. And that is from a verse in Surah Nur. Specifically, it was a verse that was addressing Abu Bakr as-Siddiq when he was dealing with the slander of his own daughter, Aisha radiallahu anha, who is also the wife of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So you can imagine how hurt he was to hear the slander of his daughter going around, and he wanted to withhold financial contribution to a family member of his who he was supporting financially, but found out that this family member was also talking smack essentially about Aisha. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, would you not like that Allah forgive you? And so that was essentially a reminder that, yes, Abu Bakr, as do all of us, this was supposed to be a lesson to all of us, has the right to withhold if he chooses to do so. He has no he has no religious obligation to financially provide for a distant relative like he was. But at the end of the day, to do what is better, even when it hurts us, is what, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards so greatly. So let's jump into the first submission. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have someone from Brooklyn in New York. We are neighbors. We're very close. I think I'm just maybe 2 hours from where you are, inshallah. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and we are going to start off with the first submission that we have. Just give me a second as I pull up that for you guys. All right, bismillah. Okay, so this submission is from Halima, who is from the United States, and she is 21 years old. She says, Dear Hannah, I am a young Muslim woman who has been working really hard the past few years to become more pious and have discovered many things about myself that I didn't expect to. Subhanallah. However, one thing that I terribly struggled with was abandonment issues and wanting no longer to be alone. This made me very desperate in the past and led me to commit a terrible sin. I want to get married to a good Muslim man in the next couple of years, but I am scared that this will stop me. I don't think you guys are expecting what's coming next. I was in a situationship with another woman, non-Muslim, for around 3 years. We never officially got together, nor did we ever meet in person as we met online. I feel so ashamed because I didn't have the knowledge, maturity, nor piety that I do now. That has made me realize what I've done. We are no longer in the situationship, but we are still friends because she has helped me a lot with my self-discovery, and to be honest, she is the only friend I have. I am neurodiverse, and for my entire life, I was always isolated and seen as eccentric. I didn't seek counsel from my family because I don't live in the safest environment. When I start getting close to a man who could be a potential husband, should I tell him about my past, or is it not his business? I'm struggling because I don't want to feel like I'm hiding this big secret, but I am also very ashamed. I also don't know how to approach the topic of me being neurodiverse and disclosing it to my future husband. I'm self-diagnosed, but I know I am strange and I know that there is something off about me. My family does not know that I have come to this conclusion, but I have no idea how to disclose this to my future husband. I'm so scared of being judged, and in my family's country of origin, mental health/mental illness is still a huge stigma and is taboo. I feel like such a failure as a Muslim because of the struggles I have due to neurodiversity, and would really appreciate your help, even if it's just referring me to someone who may understand my experience better. Thank you for reading this, and Jazakallahu khairan. وإياكم حليما. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, inshallah. And hopefully, we're able to offer some sort of support and help you with answering such a question. We have some more people watching this live. If you're watching, please drop a salam in the chat box and let me know where you're watching from, inshallah. The chat box, we love for it to be popping. We love for people to be communicating, asking questions, chatting it up. So please, please, please feel free to do that. So let's just go over kind of the gist of the question. So we have this young 21-year-old Muslim woman who was striving to become better and found herself in a situation where she was feeling very lonely. Well, as we know, when you are in a situation like that where you have loneliness, it's very vulnerable, and shaitan loves to pry on our vulnerabilities, especially loneliness, because loneliness will make us do things for company that maybe we wouldn't have even expected that we were willing to do. As a result of that, and to explain is not to justify, but as a result of that, she found herself in a situationship with another woman. So this is a woman in a situationship with another woman. What's a situationship? For those of you guys who know, if you don't know, if you've never heard the word or the term situationship, if you're, not of Gen Z age and are not sure what that is, please comment below. I'm curious to know, or not comment, chat, send a message in the chat and let me know. But a situationship is basically a type of relationship where there's no verbal commitment, meaning you don't say that you're exclusive to one another. You don't express that you want to be with one another, but it is obvious that there are mutual feelings, and it's a very sticky situation to be in. Obviously, there's no Islamic situationship, and in a situation like this, a woman and a woman, that's absolutely not permitted in Islam. So she finds herself in the situationship. It is about 3 years. And let's say that it was with a man and not a woman. The other issue is that this person is also not Muslim. So there's a of principles and values there. There was a certain layer of protection because they had not met in person. This was exclusively online, but obviously a lot of things can happen online. Allahu A'lam, were inappropriate messages sent, were pictures sent, things like of that sort. May Allah, make it easy in that situation and just protect from any exposure. But with that being said, that is over. And as she got more pious, she left that. And also, she still has connections or relationship with that person as a friend, that woman as a friend. Now, she speaks a lot about the fact that she calls herself neurodiverse, and usually we use the term neurodivergent, but what does that mean for those of you guys who are not familiar with, neurodivergent versus neuronormative, or I forgot what the other word is for it. It just essentially means that someone whose brain doesn't operate in the same way and has more of a proclivity towards mental health issues. So someone who has struggled with depression regularly would be considered neurodivergent. Someone who struggles with anxiety a lot would be considered neurodivergent. So typically mental illness is not the norm. And so because of that, anything that deviates from the norm is considered divergent. So that is what she's referencing. Now, the other layer of it comes that she's worried about, okay, is this issue that I'm neurodivergent going to affect my my options for getting married? And then how do I bring this thing up about the situationship plus this neurodivergent thing? How am I gonna how do I deal with that, especially when mental illness and just discussion on mental health is stigmatized in her community? And honestly, I mean, across all of our communities, I'm sure there is a level of stigma around this. So how should she deal with this? She's asking, and so I'm going to, inshallah, offer some kind of framework to think about this. So first and foremost, bismillah. Let's start off with a reminder to ourselves, right? That yes, even in a situation as interesting as this, where shaitan was able to take advantage of the vulnerabilities, where then we have to really be willing to hold ourselves radically accountable. So you chose to entertain shaitan's influence and find yourself in a really difficult situation. You are not at the point where you are no longer involved in that, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the forgiver of all sins. And when you truly, truly find yourself having removed yourself from that sin, what should you do? You should make sincere Toba. ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness sincerely. You need to resolve to not go back to that, meaning you need to cut off anything that is going to be a pathway back to that situation, right? Because when there are certain sins that when we fall into them, we now know that we actually have that's a possibility, meaning there's the possibility of the cycle starting over again. So you got to be smart about cutting off any pathways that could bring you back to that. And lastly is making sure that anything underlying that created that vulnerability, you try your best to address. So what does that mean? So first and foremost, when I say you need to cut off anything um, that could lead to this happening again, the first thing that we would probably consider is the person that was involved. If they're still in your life, that is still a risk there. And very often, I mean, whether it's a situationship or a full blown relationship, it's not advised to continue to have that person as a friend. Why? Because that opening, it leaves an opening. And we don't want that opening to be open. Now, I completely understand, right? In situations like this, you guys, when you don't have a community around you, you don't have, a group of friends around you, it's very tempting to hold on to people who give you a sense of comfort. They're familiar and they give you a sense of comfort, even if they're not good for you. With that being said, we still have to really think about who are the people that we put around us. The Prophet ﷺ really emphasized in the Quran, emphasizes the importance of the community we surround ourselves with. So that's the first thing to think about, inshallah. The other side of it is talking about the loneliness aspect, right? How do we make sure that that doesn't allow us to fall into something like this again? While building community is really, really important, it can be hard when you're dealing with neurodivergent, issues. But there's people and a person for everyone. There are virtual communities of people who share like interests. There's masajid who hold, youth halaqat and events. And there are, if you're in school, there are lots of places to meet people. And really, truly, if any of you guys are struggling with this, because it's a very, in our society nowadays, hyper individualism has led to the breakdown of communities. And because of that, it can be harder to find the people around you, your tribe. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring that to you. And I promise you, you will find that doors open for you that weren't open before. Because when you ask Allah for good company, it's that good company that helps you even worship Him further. So inshallah, you will see that. With that being said, right, you're mentioning a lot of this idea of being neurodivergent. And as someone who practices medicine, the first thing that came to mind is you should get evaluated for specifically for autism, because when I hear a woman saying she can tell there's something off about her, people can probably tell there's something off about her. It sounds a lot like autism, and autism shows up very differently in women than it does in men, or in females than it does in males. So if you can get a psychological evaluation, you can go to you're 21, so you're above the age of being a minor. Go to your primary care doctor and say you'd like to get evaluated for autism or some sort of, possible personality disorder. Why? Because it then helps you to know if that is the case, what are the resources to be able to cope with the aspects of something like autism spectrum disorder. There's a very specific type of therapy for autism spectrum disorder that helps people communicate better, be more socially, be able to, what's the word that I'm looking for? Adapt to social situations a lot better, because specifically in the case of autism, and obviously I'm not diagnosing you because I don't know who you are, I don't know how you interact, I haven't had the time to evaluate you. And even though I do have a degree to practice medicine, my show and my channel is not about diagnosing or practicing medicine. Rather, I'm just trying to kind of give you some insight into what is one of the possibilities. And so with that being said, with autism spectrum disorder, obviously we see in people that who have this disorder, it is hard for them to socially to understand social cues, to socially connect. That is actually a lot of the first signs that we see for much younger children in with autism, is that their social adaptation is much different than the normal social adaptation that we would see in children without autism spectrum disorder, and that usually prompts the evaluation. So go get evaluated. Go, don't be afraid of it, inshallah. You can see a psychiatrist, you can see a psychologist. If you are currently in college, they often, they have usually their psychology or therapy department. You can go and you can request an evaluation there as well. And there is privacy matters. They're not going to indicate it to anyone if you are concerned about that. At least if you're in the United States, there is something called HIPAA, which is a very, very strong set of laws that protect patients against their health information being leaked. And honestly, countries across the world have something similar, if it's not HIPAA. Now, you asked about, do I show or do you tell your future husband about this? I'm going to pull up your question again so I can see, right? You mentioned the not being able to seek counsel from your family. You don't live in the safest environment. And I'm sorry, that honestly is a really hard situation to be in. And it's something that I think a lot of the audience members share, because I see it in the other episodes like this, where we'll talk about situations with parents or dealing with family members, difficult family interpersonal relationships, and so many people comment or message that they too have issues feeling safe to disclose certain things to their family. With that being said, do not think that, despite what the red pillars will say, who for some reason they're like Muslim red pillars who think that they know better than the Prophet ﷺ, and will say things along the lines of like, a woman who's done this sin, done that sin, will never find a husband. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who does sins who we marry, and ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who forgives, and he's the one that determines the forgiveness and what comes after that. So anyone who's trying to make the claim that you cannot find someone, don't listen to them. I am not going to tell you what to do in this situation. Why? Because I don't believe that I'm at this level in Islamic knowledge to be able to say what is required and what is not required in a situation like that. I would advise you to speak to a sheikh, a scholar in your community who knows better, and you can kind of speak up the details to a little better, and who would be able to help you. But what I do think of immediately is the principle of the protection of our sin. And I'll share with you what I was taught by my teachers, and you may do with that information as you may, which was that when it comes to the disclosing, because guess what? The majority of people have some sort of past. A lot of us, before we came into loving Islam and accepting Islam as our own, we had a past that we're not probably the most proud of, and it varies. It might have gone to super major sin when we think of zina, for example, and others it might have been something that wouldn't be considered a major sin but was wrong nonetheless. Someone mentioned that they're a rebel on this, right? Obviously, if you had a time in your life where you didn't know Islam at all, you were living in sin just almost as the norm of society, right? But when we make that decision to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that past version of ourselves is no longer who defines us. Now, with that being said, if there's something in the past, this is what I was taught by my teachers, if there's something in the past that could significantly affect, or I shouldn't say, that can affect your relationship, it needs to be disclosed. Example, if you committed zina and you contracted some sort of STI, you need to disclose that, because you giving the risk, or you having the risk of infecting your partner, who may have been in a situation where they did not commit that sin, they maintained themselves for marriage, you put them in harm's way. If there's a situation, there's usually relationships that tend to cause issues. But example, if you have a history where you dealt with an addiction, whether it was to a substance, whether it was to adult entertainment, things of that sort. And the thing about certain, depending on the level of grip that addiction had on you, if there's a possibility that could reoccur in your future, that person needs to know. If you're struggling with an addiction right now, that person needs to know. You can't be an alcoholic trying to get married and, end up destroying the life of another person because you are too ashamed to share that. So if there's a situation where you have a child from an illicit relationship and that person that you're speaking to, potential partner, your potential husband or wife needs to know because that's going to affect their life. If it was even your divorce, let's say there's people who hide the fact that they're divorced, you should not be hiding the fact that you're divorced. And there were children as well. Obviously, they need to know that. And it's not, you'd be surprised how often that situations come up where people will hide these things. So if it affects the relationship, disclose it. Otherwise, we hide our sins. We hide our sins, and if it's not going to lead, and I don't, when I hear about something like this, it's not a situation where it'll follow you into a marriage necessarily. We hide our sins. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that one aspect of his mercy is that he does put a cover over our sins, and that those who reveal sins, especially in pride and like excitement, this is why social media is very, very, very scary to me, you guys. When I go on TikTok and Instagram and I see people Muslims posting their sins, I it scares me. Do you not realize that there's going to be a point where when you pass away, no one's going to go in and clear your social media with you. So then after you're gone and underground, who all of those your TikToks are still up and people are still finding them, and if there's haram in there and you're exposing your sin, you're getting sayyat for that in your grave. That's so terrifying. So side note, you guys, but please be responsible with what you post online. It doesn't go away, right? And just be careful about that, inshallah. But yeah, so be mindful of that, inshallah, and hide your sins. We have some comments in the chat, inshallah, that I will read as soon as I'm done with that. So we talked about it, inshallah. Build a better circle around you. Distance yourself from the person who becomes the opening to a past sin. Get evaluated, inshallah. Don't feel like because you're neurodivergent that all of a sudden all the options are taken away from you. Part of that is honestly there's a genetic component for a lot of people. With mental illness, it's very complicated. It's multifactorial, it's multifaceted. There are elements of it that are very much genetic. We can actually trace the genetic code of someone and see whether or not they have the genes for certain, aspects of depression, anxiety. There's an environmental side of things. Someone can have the genes for those issues but never actually express them, where the genes don't get expressed, so they don't experience the symptoms or the reality of the mental illness because they grew up in an environment that didn't turn that on. Other people grow up in environments where it very much does turn on. But the thing about it is that at the end of the day, if you are tested with such a thing, do not think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you with something regarding your health, and that because of that you are doomed forever. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, and that in He has made space for all of us, right? Whether we deal with mental health issues or not. I talk about this on my channel as well, but my journey with mental health, and alhamdulillah, if it ever stopped me from having community around me, it was only because I was doing it to myself. And I'm just speaking about my personal experience. So just remind yourselves, inshallah, that there's always an opening for you. So I hope that was helpful, inshallah. And thank you again, Halima, for sharing your question. We're going to jump into the comments. So we have a viewer, inshallah, from Ottawa, Canada. Wa alaikum assalam to Ruby, watching from Jersey. I'm from Gen Z, and I've never heard the word situationship. It was the Gen Zers who taught me the word situationship. I had not heard about it either, and I was like, it is an interesting concept for sure, because it goes to show how twisted this, like, our sense of intimacy is, where it has become so common. And actually millennials, I'm considered a millennial, also get themselves into the situation too. I was gonna say ourselves, but I'm married, so it's not a situationship, alhamdulillah. But also get themselves into a situation. And again, it shows how warped the idea of intimacy has, what the sexual revolution has done truly to just socially how we see relationships, where people no longer have this sense of almost ghira. Like in Islam, we're supposed to have a certain level of ghira about things. Ghira meaning like a protectiveness, right? There's a certain level of they sometimes it's described as protective jealousy. I don't like the description of that, but a protectiveness. You have an honor towards it. We've lost the ghira when it comes to showing up for a relationship. Men don't court women anymore. You slide into their DMs. By the way, you guys, if you hear weird noise, I'm sorry. It's just the fridge. Men will slide into DMs. Women don't say go to my dad, or there's no let me pick you up from your, if you, I'm talking about non-Muslims, let me pick you up from your house and meet your father. None of that is happening. We've actually taken away a lot of those protections socially. Not we, we're Muslim, but society has taken those social protections away, and it led to this thing called love becoming so casual. And now you wonder why people are finding themselves in constant hookup culture and breakups and heartbreak, and no one's getting married until much later. Then the marriages are falling apart because you built your idea of love in a relationship off of things that were flimsy instead of creating a steady, stable foundation from the very beginning where those protections were in place. And obviously, when we treat something that was sacred, marriage is sacred, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who instituted marriage. We treat it something sacred as casual, and we destroy the foundation of it. Nothing but harm comes from that. So, okay. Oh, someone says, Assalamu alaikum, Mitchell, American revert, living in Mecca for 15 years now. How is everyone? Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. That is so cool. We have two people. Oh no, we have someone watching from Mecca. Thank you so much for watching. How is it in Mecca right now? And I gotta ask the question, if you're still watching, inshallah, how often do you go to do Umrah? My husband's teacher, his sheikh who he studies under, had mentioned that when he was living in when he had moved to, I believe he was in Mecca or somewhere around it, would go to do Umrah every Thursday. And I was like, subhanallah, how incredible of an opportunity to be able to do that. Like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because at the end of the day, if you guys don't know this, Umrah and Hajj are actually by an invitation basis by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so essentially, if you've ever had a situation where maybe you've planned to go to Umrah and it didn't work out, or you heard of someone, it's an invitation basis. So when we make the intention to go to Umrah, we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to invite us. Otherwise, you ain't getting in. Someone mentioned I suggest being very honest with the potential spouse. Still, don't go into vivid details. Allah will give you someone who loves you and accepts you based on them knowing the truth. Never build good things on top of bad things. So I think I have a bit of a different opinion on that, just from, you know, from my personal view, just to say that because there is often so much cultural stigma and bias around certain things, I think we have to be mindful of what we share. Again, and there's a certain level of coverage of sin that we do have to do. It's an interesting world we live in. We really did shift the level of grace that we as Muslims are supposed to give one another, because can I rant a little bit, you guys? Tell me if I can rant. Like, I have something that's been on my mind that I've been wanting to share, inshallah. Comment below if you want to hear the rant, because saw something on TikTok that really, like, grinded my gears, and I want to talk to you about it. Wa alaikum assalam, watching from Trinidad. That is so cool. You guys, we truly do have a worldwide audience here. We have Trinidad, we have people from, I always get folks from Nigeria, we got Canada, US, Australia, the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Morocco. Gosh, I think I've had someone from Tunisia. SubhanAllah, we're truly all over. Someone said, go off, sis. I'm ready to go off. So, creating this YouTube channel, the whole point of it was God-conscious self-improvement. I, as someone, alhamdulillah, who had the opportunity of being a part of an Islamic community organizing space since I was 15 years old. I'm turning 29 this year. That's really cool. I'm Gen X. We got Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X all on here. So, with that being said, there was a certain level of adab that I was taught, and how you deal with certain matters, how you call out public sin, how you when things are happening in the commentary that you decide to put out publicly. I learned there was a certain way you do it, right? And ultimately, and this is just something I learned from the scholars that I had the opportunity to sit with, was that when learning, becoming a student of knowledge, the first thing that a righteous scholar should teach their student is not hadith, is not fiqh, is not Quran, it is adab. It is a way that you deal with other people. It is the adab of how you teach knowledge. It is the adab of how you accept the knowledge. It is the adab of how you, how you teach it to an audience at large. Forgive me. With that being said, the culture around Muslim influencers, Muslim content creators has got me like messed up, because for some reason that idea of adab has gone completely down the drain, and you have reaction videos of nobodies. You're not a scholar, you don't know anything about the deen. You open the verse, you read the translation, not even the Arabic, you don't understand the Arabic, and then you derive from it a fiqhi opinion that you have no idea, you can't even quote which scholar gave that fiqhi opinion, and then you use it to try to beat people over the head with it. And my like reaction to that has just been, how lost are we as an ummah? And I say subhanallah to that. And there's a specific brother on TikTok actually who very, I'm like questioning if I want to share his name or not, because I'll hold off right now. Where what he does, his entire platform is essentially, he's just this angry, he seems very Salafi to me, angry dude. There's no idea, I have no clue who his teacher is. I don't even know if he has a teacher. Something tells me that he doesn't have a teacher, that he just does this research on his own, watches YouTube videos of scholars, and then tries to regurgitate what it is that they're saying, not realizing that those scholars went through a very rigorous level of education to get to the point where they can say what they're saying, and they can back it up with evidence, and they can do it in a way that has adab. And he'll take these, like, he'll stitch videos of other TikTokers, and then he'll make commentary and like call them out on it. And here's the thing, it's one thing when someone is straight up saying something is haram, like something's halal, that's haram. If you're dealing with a Muslim who's straight up saying, hey, this is halal and really it's haram, you can call out the sin without disrespecting and degrading or shaming the sinner, right? Even if it's a public call out, you don't get to attack the character of that person, because at the end of the day, you're not Allah. And you're certainly not the Prophet ﷺ. The other thing is, what really drives me is, how do you treat someone who very intentionally shares what is haram the same as someone who mistakenly shared something with good intention, not knowing, and when they were corrected, they took the corrective action. There was a sister who I actually follow. I wanted to get her on this podcast, by the way. She's a sweetheart. I really appreciate the way that she goes around about thinking about Islamic personal development. She definitely has a Sufi leaning. You can tell that very clearly, but I was more interested in the way that she structured her systems around, like, her day-to-day of how she worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what I really was interested in. She posted a video, and it was a very, like, one of those odd tasawwuf type videos where if you didn't grow up in that space, you kind of hold back and you're like, what is going on? What is she talking about? And in a situation like that, if that was me, I would have messaged her privately, and I would have been like, sis, like, I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to build a love of deen in people's heart, but honestly, this is something we have no foundation in the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ never said that. It is one of those things that, because it is such a gray area and it can actually be very misleading, I would advise to take down the video. Tell me where this brother stitches a video. He covers her face on the video, by the way, which to me is silly, because you tagged her. So you cover her face, but then you tagged her. He corrected. It wasn't correction, it was humiliation. He humiliated her, made fun of her. And instead, you could do it in a way that is respectful. And I think that's what's been pissing me off. This 20-something-year-old nobody who's not a scholar. I can't even call him a student of knowledge, because he certainly does not have the adab of a student of knowledge, is marching on a TikTok like he owns it, trying to shame every Muslim that he disagrees with. By the way, there's difference of opinion. That's another thing. If there's a difference of opinion, you don't get to thwart your opinion as the top opinion. You just don't get to do that. A lot of the scholars do that debating. That's not your job. Anyways, you guys, I'm done with the rant. I'm done with the rant. It just pissed me off so badly. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I just feel bad for him because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when he is going to have to stand up and he's going to have to be accountable for every person that he either backbit, slandered, because some of them might not have ever seen the video that he posted about them. And if it is true what he said and they didn't see it, that's backbiting. And if it's not true what he said, because a lot of things he's truly just making things up based on his own opinion, that's slander. And then his audience is a bunch of losers who also lack adab, who then go and attack that person in the comments, call them kuffar. You're teaching your audience to call people to make takfir on people, and you don't do anything to correct that. There's no, hey guys, don't attack the person, hey guys, make sure you have adab. Sorry guys, let me know if you can hear me. For some reason it went to let me see. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, perfect. For some reason it went to the screen without me touching it. I must have touched it by accident. With that being said, yeah, I too hate when people weaponize the deen. So Allahumma salli Muhammad. Yeah, he's gonna have to be held accountable for it. Please don't get, anytime you start to feel, I'm gonna tell you guys right now, when you start to feel very emotionally riled up about some sort of Islamic topic online, right then and there, you guys need to hit the pause button, because it is that exact emotion that Shaitan then uses as his device to get us to think that we're doing something halal, but in reality, we're actually doing something haram. So we have this good intention of trying to correct and, showcase the proper deen, but then we do it in a way that, by the way, if I was not Muslim and I saw that brother on TikTok and other brothers like him, because it's usually brothers. I'm not seeing women doing this. If I saw that, I would not want to be Muslim. Isn't that sad? I'm saying this I was born as a Muslim. I adopted, I considered myself a Muslim throughout my life. I would not want to be Muslim, because I would think, what is this faith where you have these brothers who are willing to shame women for very small mistakes that they didn't even realize, and they seem so aggressive and careless? And is this what your prophet teaches, that this is how you guys are supposed to behave, with such little regard for the feelings of other people, and with so much hatred and aggression that you're willing to humiliate people online? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay, guys, we are going to jump into the next question. Then I am going to, there are some questions that popped up, inshallah. There are some questions that popped up in the live chat, so we will talk about those as well. Okay. On to question number 2 of today. Dear Hannah, I was curious on how to deal with parents that both have depression and don't enjoy each other. I want them to have a better relationship with each other and Allah. What should I do? Soha from Australia. I told you guys we have a worldwide, subhanAllah, we have a worldwide audience here, is asking this question. I believe she might have been 16. I didn't put the age up, but I believe she was 16. So this was definitely, it was one of those questions that, because she was so young, there was something very heartfelt about this question for me. I am an auntie to a 20, how old is she? 20-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old. And so I automatically thought of my nieces when I read this question. The thing about it, this is an interesting question. It is something, we don't talk a lot about this a lot in our community. You guys know this, right? When we talk about mental health, we typically are referring to younger people. If you've noticed the conversations around mental health and mental health stigma, we're typically talking about younger people. We don't have conversations about what depression looks like in parents and how that affects children. And depression in parents is one of the experiences that can have such a significant effect on the development of a child from when they're a child all the way into adulthood in ways that we don't even realize. It affects the nervous system of a child of depressed parents to an extent that sometimes they're not even able to distinguish until they're full-blown adults. There's actually a stat on this, and a lot of research data on this, where it shows that if you have even if it's just one depressed parent, you are 2 to 3 times more likely than the average to develop depression in your lifetime. That right there is really, really powerful. And why is that? Why, if you guys might be wondering why. Well, a lot of depression, while yes, there is an element of depression that is very, again, we talked about this, a lot of mental illness does have you can have a genetic predisposition to it, 100%. There's also an aspect of depression that is very, very psychosocial, meaning our environment, what is around us, affects our ability to develop it. And that is why the treatment, a treatment of choice of depression outside of the medication side of it, SSRIs, is cognitive behavioral therapy. You change the way you think, you change the way you behave. Those are things that you can actually control. It has a psychosocial aspect of it. And so when you see your parents who are supposed to be your guide, they're supposed to teach you how to deal with challenges in your life. They're supposed to show you what do you do when you get knocked down, and you see that their coping mechanism in a way are informed by their depression. That's what you're learning. And so you don't learn the skills to cope with hardship. You don't learn the skills of how to manage emotions. You don't learn the skills of how to pick yourself up, and it lends itself to a risk of higher depression. Now, depression is extraordinarily complex, so I please, I hope you guys don't think that I'm undermining it in any way. I dealt with it for a very long time. It can be very, very difficult to cope with, but I just want to emphasize that psychosocial side of things. Even in the scientific community, as someone, again, who studied and practices medicine, there has been a shift from this narrative where we used to think that it was simply you might have heard it, right? It's a chemical disturbance, it's a chemical imbalance, and there's a shift because the research is showing it's actually not as much of a chemical imbalance as we thought it was. It's not as biologically determined as we thought it was. There's a reason why depression levels are going up as social changes come about, as we become more of an individualistic society with less community, less of those protective measures of the social interaction are no longer there. Those strong family units that used to be protective against depression are no longer there. The food we put into our body affects our mood. Yes, it does, from the way that it affects our blood sugar spikes to the way the chemicals that are actually put in the food affect the levels of inflammation in our body. Brain inflammation is a huge proponent of depression. So all of that to say, it might sound boring to you guys, but because the complexity of depression, even though it was a 2-sentence question, the answer is very complex. With that being said, it is really important for all of us to understand, while we care for our parents, while we want better for them, at the end of the day, you are dealing with 2 full-blown adults who have their own autonomy, who have their own decision-making power, and we cannot do anything to control their actions. And so when it comes to depression, you might know this if you have been depressed, or you know of someone who has experienced depression. Nothing's going to get them to do something unless they for themselves decide that they're going to do it. There needs to come a point in time where you decide, even though that motivation is not there, even though the sadness is weighing me down, I am going to push against it and break through it and do the things that are better for me. And inshallah, one day I will make a video all about this. How do you, from a evidence-based standpoint, actually actually defeat depression as a symptom? So you cannot, if you try to control the behavior of other people, you will drive yourself crazy, because that is just not how it works, especially when it's a dynamic like a child to a parent, because at the end of the day, that's a power dynamic. You're never going to win, right? SubhanAllah. The other thing that was mentioned is actually, it's very interesting, which was they don't enjoy each other. That's probably a huge trigger. I don't know the situation. I don't know obviously who they are or what the relationship is like, but that's probably a huge driver of depression for them, because unfulfilling marriages, unfulfilling relationships can be a huge burden. And there are a lot of, I mean, you see it time and time again, right? People who end up in relationships where they just feel like they lose themselves. Maybe it was started on a basis that wasn't the best. Maybe just life got in the way. Again, it's a decision that they have to make together. You can make suggestions. Mom, Dad, why don't you consider marital counseling? Why don't you guys go on a date together, do something fun together? You can make suggestions, but you cannot change the outcome if they don't make the decision to do it for themselves. So with that being said, with that being said, I want them to have a better relationship with each other and Allah. What should I do? I want you to think about what are the things that you do have control over in the situation. You have control over your own behavior, and you have control over your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So my advice to you in a situation like this, make plenty of dua, make dua for Allah to change their hearts. Make dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change their hearts. Make dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease their burden, to ease their pain, to lift their depression. And you showed them through your behavior what it looks like to do that. Okay? And I really hope, inshallah, Suha, I know you're super young. I really hope that it helps, inshallah. And just protect yourself. Do good for yourself, too. Make sure, if it's affecting you, that you seek the support that you need as well, because it can be a very big weight on any person. Let's jump back to the comments, inshallah. Okay. So, okay. I had asked a question about for the person who lives in Mecca, whether they do Umrah frequently. And they said, I do Umrah at least 1 to 2 times a week now. I am pushing 50, so I am not as mobile as I was when I first came here. SubhanAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you. And I mean, that's incredible. Please, 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 the next time you make Umrah, I hope you, am I showing, inshallah? Inshallah, the next time you make Umrah, please remember me, remember this channel and your dua, and make dua for the people who are also watching. I'm 100% gonna force myself into your dua. Okay, we had a question here. Can you tell me how to get closer to Deen, and can you tell me how to leave sins and be closer towards Deen? Oh, that is such a loaded question. It's a good question. It's a very, very powerful question. So can you tell me how to get closer to Deen? How to get closer to Deen? I think you and leave sins. So I can't tell you, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, and the Prophet ﷺ has told us. So I will just quote some things from the Quran and from the Hadith. And inshallah, that will be of support. So first and foremost, to know Deen, we have to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should get to know Him through His book. So spending time with the Quran, whether it is sitting down and reading it, whether it is listening to the recitation of it, even if you don't understand it, it washes over your heart. It does have an effect. These are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so they do have a profound effect. Even opening the Mus'haf, opening the book of the Quran is worship in and of itself, right? So get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also get to know His attributes. He uses several names to describe Himself. What are those names? What do they mean? What are the implications of those names, using those names in dua, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to call Him by His most beautiful names, meaning to use those names in dua. When you do that, right, it becomes that that relationship you form with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through it starts to overshadow your own desires in a way. Now, number 2, there is a hadith Qudsi, and in it, hadith Qudsi is basically, these are Allah's words, but they're in the form of a hadith delivered through the Prophet ﷺ, not the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that His servant does not come closer to Him, to anything more beloved to Him than His obligations, His obligatory deeds, right? So you, as a Muslim, you want to grow closer to Deen, meaning you need to get closer to Allah. You need to do it through the obligations, the things He already prescribed for us. That is our salah, that is our fasting during Ramadan, that is our zakah, that is our constant renewal of the testimony of faith, the shahada. And then the hadith Qudsi goes on to say that beyond that, doing extra, and then we do extra deeds, right? So we go closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our mandatory deeds, obligations, the fara'id, and then we do extra deeds. And when you do that, forgive me for not remembering the exact wording, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I become the eyes through which he sees, the foot with which he strikes the earth, right? Basically, Allah, this is metaphorical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that now your actions become guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that. So make it a point that you are doing extra, you're fulfilling obligations and then doing extra good deeds. Now, what does the Prophet ﷺ tell us about this? He tells us that when we commit a sin, what should we be doing? We should be doing a good deed, right? He says, when you commit a sin, perform a good deed because it replaces the previous sin, right? So it becomes this almost conditioning of sorts that when you do something wrong, the automatic thought we should do is how do we quantitatively affect that in our record by doing something good instead so it overshadows the wrong. Not only that, obviously the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ tell us so often to make Toba. How often do we have a reference of asking Allah for forgiveness, asking Allah for pardon, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for to accept our repentance? In multiple ways we are to seek Allah's mercy and his forgiveness. Do that. Why? Because in one instance it is going to erase your sin and replace it with good deeds. In another one it is going to remove it completely from your record where you don't even ever, it doesn't even get held against you on the day of judgment. It doesn't get mentioned to you. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but I really hope that inshallah it helps. Now, I want to jump in here, you guys, and actually mention something to you. If you are on the live, if you're watching the live replay with everyone else, we are coming up to the last 10 days of Ramadan, which, or subhanallah, insane how quickly it's coming up. So if you started fasting on a Monday, I know I did, the beginning of the first 10 nights, I believe, is going to be Friday evening. With that being said, Laylatul Qadr is going to be during one of those 10 nights. And we're not lucky like our friend who is in Mecca and might be able to be doing Umrah all throughout this time. I put out a video yesterday on how to maximize your Laylatul Qadr. Please, 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 if there's one video you would ever watch on my channel, do not miss out on that video because I promise you the information in that is going to inshallah transform the way you go about these last 10 days. I offer a lot of practical advice. It really shifts your mentality and mindset as to how to approach these days. Watch it, share it with others so you can steal the reward. If Laylatul Qadr is better than 1,000 nights, 1,000 nights of good deeds, 1,000 months of good deeds. What is that? What it is? Actually, yeah, 1,000 months of good deeds, 1,000 months of worship, 1,000 months of reading Quran. You encouraging others to do that, you get the reward for that. So please share the video. Do not miss out. I share a very, very important dua in there that the Prophet ﷺ recommended that we all memorize and say on Laylatul Qadr. If you are only able to say a single dua, which obviously is not the case, but if you are only able to say a single dua, this is the dua that you should know about, plus many other things. So it is on my channel for you guys to enjoy. I'm still reading, inshallah. Someone says, Assalamu alaikum, sis. What are your thoughts on Muslim parents forcing their daughters to force arranged marriage to someone that the daughter has no intention of marrying? I think that's wrong of the parents. Oh, it's not only wrong, it's actually considered dhulm, oppression. And in the case of the nikah contract is not valid. You cannot, la ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in religion, and that applies to this. And the Prophet ﷺ very sternly did away with that. The thing is, she must say no. She has to say no. You, like, verbally, as a woman, please make sure that if you're ever, I really pray that this isn't a situation, but this is a situation for, unfortunately, a lot of women. You say no, verbalize it, and you make sure that the imam or whoever's conducting the marriage knows that you said no, because if they are actually a righteous imam who knows their deen, they're going to know that the marriage contract they're about to perform is not valid, and actually they would be performing something haram. It is oppression, and the parents who do that are going to be held accountable for their oppression on the day of judgment, and that is not a sin that any of us would ever feel confident walking up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. They have absolutely no right without, like, that is just as clear as day. I've never heard a single scholar disagree with that. Someone says, I think our problem with relationships and marriages is that we reach an awkward point where we are neither traditional and neither fully liberal. We've taken the worst aspects of both extremes. I agree with that. That's a very good way of putting it. Nowadays, especially in Western societies, we've adopted a lot of the ways of searching for a spouse, or the ways of getting to know someone that venture on the outside perimeter of what is allowed in our deen. And because of that, you get these negative effects. So I agree. And here we are in this awkward place. Agreed. When I was 2 to 3 years old, I fell down the stairs on a tricycle and was out for hours. I developed stuttering and other issues diagnosed with Asperger's autism. My functional skills are impaired. Self-discovery is one of the most contradictive statements, but I'm not a fool. I'm a little confused about the self-discovery side of things, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. I don't see women doing this. Please do not give stereotypes space. When you said the man was a 20-year-old nobody, and you said he was not a student of knowledge, if you were saying this, he wouldn't say baseless accusations. Actually, he does say baseless accusations. Again, this goes back to the point of when you're trying to give accusations, you're trying to call out public sin, you need to have a basis, and part of the basis is you need to have scholarly knowledge and be someone who understands the way that scholars go about calling out public action. With that being said, if you are a true student of knowledge, then there's a certain adab that you learned. If you did not learn that adab, then I would question what scholars you're sitting in front of. So that is why I say what I say. Depression in parents means that siblings will develop anxiety and stress as well. The environment around you affects your mood. You need to focus on yourself and find what makes you happy. 100% agreed. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for this. Inshallah, we're getting Umrah du'as, you guys. This is a very oh, thank you for sharing this hadith. This is actually a really good hadith. So when we talk about oppression, this was a saying actually of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who is a scholar of our faith. He's actually technically one of the scholars for whom a school of thought of fiqh is derived from. And essentially, while Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was imprisoned, he was imprisoned at a certain point by the oppressive leaders of the time. They asked him about a specific hadith where the oppressors are, the oppressors and those who aid them are going to essentially be punished. And one of the what are they called? The prison guards asked him, am I then considered one of the aides of the oppressors? Meaning the people that imprisoned you, am I considered their, in service to them? Will I get punished? And Ahmad ibn Hanbal actually says something that I should have made anyone shake in their boots, where he essentially says, no, the aides of the oppressors are those that comb their hair, wash their clothes, prepare their meals, and buy and sell, right? So the people who are doing kind of the outside aspects of helping them to even exist, you are from the oppressors themselves. SubhanAllah. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. So Jazakallah khair for sharing this. It's been a while since I've heard that one. And you know what, SubhanAllah, I think it goes to a very particular point where recently I'd been seeing a lot of, again, it's short form videos on like TikTok and Instagram where people, specifically scholars, they're not actually scholars. They themselves don't qualify themselves as scholars because they know that they're not, who are talking about the boycotting aspect, right? Saying, oh, you don't have to boycott, when it comes to obviously what's going on overseas. And I have to be mindful of how I speak about this, by the way, you guys, but just for the sake of you guys know what ends up happening when we're frank about it, what ends up happening to the content. It gets censored, banned, things like that. So with that being said, I'd seen these videos and it was so curious to me because I was like, why are we having people who are either scholar adjacent or some even consider them scholars, or they themselves might not be scholars, telling people don't worry too much about hitting the pockets of the people who are literally massacring our brothers and sisters across the world. And this is a really powerful hadith, very, very powerful hadith, inshallah, that I think speaks a lot to it, right? The fact that our responsibility in the way that we use our money is so that we are not considered the ones who are of service to the oppressors. Ruby says, my question is next. Looking forward to your advice, knowledge, inshallah. Okay, inshallah, I'll put that in. Jack, I'm talking about the women you were talking about in the beginning. Your statement was, I don't see women doing this. This statement alone goes against being a student of knowledge. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, that it goes against being a student of knowledge, because it's true. I don't see women doing this. I don't see women doing public call-outs of that nature with that level of aggression. Okay, let us go to our next question, inshallah. Bismillah. Dear Hannah, at what point do we give up? Whether it is finding a spouse or a free Palestine, if over time our prayers are not being answered and our efforts have no effect. I know that if our prayers are not answered, it means there could be something better. And yes, we all have our own hardship and blessings, but at a certain age or after a certain time, is it at some point disrespectful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to ask for something that is not happening? Is there a line in the sand of when to accept fate and give up? I'm not gonna lie, when I first read that question, it kind of, the closest thing that I could have to chills was I got while reading this question. So sorry guys, give me 1 second. So she poses a really powerful question, subhanAllah. When do we give up? Do we give up on our du'as at a certain point when we're seeing that they're not being when they're not being answered? Do we stop? Is it considered disrespectful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I'd absolutely love for you guys to share your thoughts, for those who have thoughts on this, in the comments as well. So what was I going to say? So first and foremost, okay, a few different things, inshallah. One moment, inshallah. When do we give up? This reminds me of a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Actually, if you guys give me a moment, I will pull up the hadith so I can make sure that I'm quoting it correctly and we can discuss it further. So this is a hadith that was reported by Anas ibn Malik, who reported that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, even if the resurrection were established upon one of you while he has in his hand a sapling, let him plant it. Meaning, if you have a baby tree that you are about to plant and the day of judgment has started, you should still plant the tree. Now, what does that mean in a situation like this? The thing about it is that sometimes we don't realize that when we're doing the things that we're doing, the actions of trying to support those who are in need or oppressed, the dua that we are making, right, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his aid and his mercy and whatever else we're asking him for, it is not because our actions and our dua have this profound impact on the world, but rather because as Muslims, it is our responsibility to stand up against injustice, stand up against oppression, even if our actions seemingly have no impact. Because we know we live in a world that justice is not going to be dished out in fully, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give the ultimate justice on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So with that being said, this hadith of you do the actions not because the actions are going to have this profound effect in the world, or it's going to free everyone, but rather because we also are going to be held accountable for what we did. And we want to be able to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, yeah, Allah, even when it all seemed hopeless, we did what you asked us to do. So that's point number one. Point number two is, when do you give up? Now you're talking about, you spoke about two different things: finding a spouse or free Palestine, right? In terms of just things that we want in our lives, right? Making dua for things that we want in our lives. This was something that I had a question on too, subhanAllah, and it was recently answered by a scholar, who Allah yarhamah, he's passed away now, but he essentially said that if you are going to make dua for something, and you've been making dua for it for a very long time, and it hasn't come to fruition, you have two places you can go. If it is still a big desire of your heart, you can continue to make dua for it. And if it feels like a relief, to be able to stop making dua for it, then you stop making dua for it. The other thing is that the Prophet ﷺ would make du'as a lot of times in generalities. And so sometimes we make dua for specific things, but rather we can also say that you make dua for whatever it is that you're asking for, or something better. Ya Allah, give me this and that, or better. Because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is better for us. And the answers to the dua, and this is from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he tells us, right, du'as are answered in three different ways. They are answered either you are given what you asked for. Either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defers a calamity, something that was destined for you, that was going to be harmful to you. He protects you from it. Or the answer number three is that on the day of judgment, those du'as will come as good deeds and they will weigh heavy on your scales. And there was another hadith regarding that third point of view, where the Prophet ﷺ told us that on the day of judgment, when we see our good deeds and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where did these come from? We recognize these are not actions that we did. And we're told that these are actually the reward of the unanswered dua, that we will say, I wish not a single dua of mine was answered in this dunya. That's a really perspective shifting hadith when you think about it. And then the last point that I kind of want to make in that is, when it comes to something as unanimously understood as we must care for the freedom of the oppressed wherever they are. And someone in the comment is mentioning different places in the world where Muslims are under attack and under oppression. And even outside of it being Muslims, as Muslims, we care about those who are oppressed regardless of if they share our faith or not. That is just the nature of the Muslim. The du'as that we are making for their freedom, even if it doesn't occur in this lifetime, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to answer those du'as in the akhirah without a doubt, because it is a day, right? There's another hadith where there's no veil between the du'a of the oppressed and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no hijab between it, meaning they go directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So do you think our du'as, we're making du'a, do you think the du'as that are being made by the mother who has lost her children, lost her family, by the father who went to get bread and came back and noticed that his entire home was collapsed, by the child who was attacked and now permanently disabled and traumatized, do you think their dua is not going to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have such a profound effect? They are. So we don't give up, because the effort or the answer to that is in Allah's hands, but our efforts are in our hands. I'm just reading the rest of the question. At a certain age or after a certain time, is it at some point disrespectful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to ask for something that is not happening? Is there a line in the sand of when to accept fate and give up? If you watch the video, inshallah, that I posted about Laylatul Qadr, and I hope that you guys will find time to watch it, inshallah, I speak actually about a story that answers this question. I won't hint to it right now, but it is one of the most profound mindset shifts I've had when I heard that story, subhanAllah, in regards to how we think about our dua. So to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not disrespectful. But know that there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that every dua of ours will be answered, right, in one of those three ways, except for the dua of the person who says, why has my dua not been answered yet? Meaning, if we find ourselves in haste, essentially we're questioning the timing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it may be that the answer is withheld because of that. Another thing, by the way, guys, it's still it's just a random fun fact for you all. When you make dua, you're not supposed to say inshallah at the end. I had a comment, someone made a dua in the comment and they said inshallah, so it prompted me to share this with you guys. But you make dua, you don't say like, oh Allah, please, I ask you to forgive me for XYZ sin, inshallah. The Prophet ﷺ told us not to say inshallah, but rather to ask the dua with certainty. Because to say inshallah it's essentially pointing to Allah. It means if Allah wills, if God wills. But the dua is already in the will of God, so you shouldn't be adding that. If I can find the hadith, inshallah, let me find it for you guys. Because the Prophet ﷺ obviously is a much better narrator of these than any of us could possibly do. Anas ibn Malik, this is another hadith reported by Anas ibn Malik's reports that the Prophet ﷺ said, when one of you calls upon Allah, let him be determined in the supplication. He should not say, oh Allah, give me inshallah if you will, for there is no one to coerce of Allah. And this is found in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So with that being said, please, 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 inshallah, remember that when you are making dua, avoid saying inshallah. Okay, as far as giving up on a specific request to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I've been praying for my other kids in the US for many, many years. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them. We'll never give up on that, while at the same time I have accepted Allah's will and pray for whatever is best for all of us in this life and the next. And that's the best, honestly, truly the best dua that you can make, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what is best. Because when you think about it, right, we all have like the whispers of the desires of our heart of what we want for ourselves, but when we defer it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's best, there's absolutely nothing that we could do or ask for that is going to override Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's best, subhanAllah. Meanwhile, I focus on what is in front of me and try to be very grateful for the kids I have with my wife here in Mecca and the wonderful and yet challenging life I have been given, alhamdulillah. Someone had said something that prompted. Ruby, did I get to your question? Let me know if I got to your question, inshallah. It might be that if I had forgotten to add it, otherwise I'll go find it myself. I keep praying they find Islam. Please pray for them, everyone. Pray we all die in Islam, especially. There was a thing about me someone said something along the lines of by ignoring certain sources of evidence that goes against me being a student of knowledge. I consider myself a da'iyah first and foremost, and when I say something as in I have not seen it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That means I have not seen it myself. Okay. Someone said, I keep praying they find Islam. Please pray for them, everyone. Pray we all die in Islam, especially. Ameen, Ya Rab. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide your children and open up hidayah for them and make it easy on you. I know it's really hard for those of us who have family members who are not Muslim, and we want the guidance for them. We want goodness for them. So you're in the perfect place to be making dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you. We never give up. We must realize that Allah is protecting us, which is when we ask for something else. Allah will reward those who are pressed and suffering, like the situation in Palestine. Oh, thank you so much for sharing the hadith. You got to it before I did. Another narration. Oh, this one I haven't actually heard of. Verily, nothing that Allah gives is a burden upon him. Okay, Ruby, give me like one moment, inshallah. It may have been that I just forgot to include it in the presentation. If you just give me 1 second, I will happily find it. In the meantime, inshallah, if you guys are... Oh, one moment. If you guys are still there, chat it up, inshallah, while I'm trying to find the question for you guys. I found it. Okay. I found it, alhamdulillah. So for some reason, I had thought that it was this question, a repeat question from last week, and I accidentally removed it. Forgive me for that. So this is from Sada, who's from Boston, age 32. She says, Dear Hannah, I would like some insight on how to proceed in my relationship with my parents. For context, I am an adopted child. Is this, I hope this is the correct one, right? Okay, bismillah. For context, I am an adopted child. My adoptive mother was my soulmate. She made sure to always show me love and raise me with grace. My adoptive father was never really around. He failed to build a bond with me and was not present emotionally. He fulfilled his basic provider duties, and that was the full extent of that. Now I am 32 years old with a family of my own, mashallah. My mother passed away about a year ago, Allah yarhamha. I'm sorry to hear that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her the highest levels of Jannah. Ever since her passing, my relationship with my father has been estranged. He expects the world of me, phone calls every day, visits all the time, and if I don't meet those standards, he criticizes me and becomes angry. I just don't have it in me to look for him. I do not feel the bond with him, frankly. He just feels like a stranger that I have some obligations to. Add to note, he's now married with a family of his own, and I truly believe he just wants to save face with his new family. I really don't care if I ever communicate. I'm assuming to communicate with him again with all the trauma he's inflicted. But I know we must not cut kin off. Please advise. Thank you. Sada, thank you so much for sharing this question. Again, forgive me for the mistake on my part. I, for some reason, like I said, thought that it was a question from a previous week, but I now remember because I have my notes actually up on this, inshallah. This was definitely a more complicated situation because given the context of it being adopted parents, Islam has a different way in which it views adopted relationships versus born child relationships. And I had to do some research on this because this was not my area of expertise. I had to see kind of what the scholars say about this. And a few things came to mind for me. And again, that this does not necessarily mean this is a part of your story. You can, confirm or deny. You don't have to confirm or deny any of this on the live chat, but feel free to email me afterwards if I got something right, if I was off on anything. But I immediately thought about the fact that a lot of children who are adopted, a lot of times the story that they are living is one of feeling abandonment, especially if the circumstances around the adoption was one that was more focused on the born parents not being able to take care of the child. So I think about that, and as a trauma coach, I really always like to get into the deeper seated story behind why we are feeling what we're feeling. So if that is something that you might want to consider how that paints the way you feel. If that is part of your story, how does that paint the way you feel? If that side of abandonment or not knowing your adoptive parents, is that in any which way affect your current relationship with your adopted father? The other side of it, right, is obviously very clearly the loss of your mother and how that event shifted your relationship with your adopted dad. That's something that needs a lot of exploration too, because I don't have the full context. I only have the question that you wrote. But the fact of the matter is, it seems that right after your adopted mother's passing, Allah yarhamha, there is now an emergence of, I don't know if it's a new version of emotions towards your adopted father, whereas maybe prior to that they were subdued because of the presence of your mom, because of her warmth in that relationship, and now because that relationship ends up, it's fractured in a sense, right? Obviously, Allah yarhamha, she's no longer present. I just pointed out to say that's something that you're going to want to explore further too, right? To explain is not to justify it. It's really, really important that we understand the way that our feelings about certain events in our lives affect our view or the lens through which we see the situations that we're experiencing. Trauma really paints and distorts a lot of times the way that we see what is happening to us. And because of that, if our perception is skewed in any way, for better or for worse, it'll affect our actions and the actions that we decide to take. Now, you mentioned the trauma he inflicted. I don't have details about the trauma that you were referring to specifically. Is it anything about physical abuse? Is it emotional abuse? Is it verbal abuse? I'm getting a sense of a lot of disconnection between you and your adopted father, and it makes me want to say also investigate, is there any resentment there also because of it? It sounds like there is, which is understandable if there would be. With that being said, moving on, right, I was saying that I wasn't so familiar about the side of what are the rights of the adopted parents. And so when looking into it, and I learned, and this was actually interesting to me because I wasn't fully aware of it beforehand, is that adopted parents actually don't have the rights of born parents. So the way in which we would honor and respect our born parents and the way that it is described in the Quran is not the same towards our adopted parents. And the other version of it too is that the rights that we have is not the same as the born child if we are adopted. With that being said, you still get to decide for yourself how you'd like to show up in that relationship, right? And I'm obviously not in a place to make that decision for you. That's ultimately going to be a decision that you get to make, right? I spoke in the very, very beginning about the idea of forgiveness, right? In a situation where we were harmed or oppressed or whatever it might be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not command us to forgive, but rather what he does instead, and this is from verses in Surah Nur, is that he reminds us of how profound and great the reward is for those of us who do choose the higher road of forgiving, who do choose the higher road of treating people well and honoring the people in our lives, even if it means putting aside the difficulty and pain that we experienced. And that is also a large part of healing for a lot of people, especially a lot of anyone who's dealt with interpersonal strain between them and their caregivers, whether it's born parents, adopted parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts. It is an essential part of healing, I think, to find what is going to be my happy medium where I'm still recognizing that, yes, there was pain there. There might have been fractures and ruptures that led to a very difficult life for me. But what am I going to choose to do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala versus what am I doing for the sake of myself? with that being said, you talk about how your father, adopted father, has these high expectations of you, and it's almost like this push pull, right? It's like he wants this from you, you don't want to give it, you end up having to deal with the consequence of his anger, and it's a back and forth. This is a place where boundaries really have to come into play. Boundaries are a huge part of the healing process. I know boundaries as a concept came up more so in like modern Western society. It's a term that's typically where we hear it. But the reality of it is boundaries are the way I just kind of describe it is it is the rules and regulations we set in place to guard our interaction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places boundaries on things of that sort. For example, there's boundaries in the way that women and men who are not married to one another, who are non-mahram, deal with each other, right? The Prophet ﷺ said that the believer does not get bit from the same hole twice, right? And that is in essence of, yes, when there is an issue in an interpersonal relationship that causes harm, as Muslims, we're supposed to uphold a certain level of dignity. And so that might mean setting certain boundaries so that you don't get inflicted with that harm again. And so it's going to be really important to be setting these boundaries, but doing it with Allah's pleasure in mind. I hope that makes sense, inshallah. The way boundary setting happens, sometimes it's outside of an Islamic context, is it's extremely self-centered and can also thwart the rights that other people have on us. But when it comes to an Islamic side of setting boundaries, you really have to think about, what do I do to keep me protected, but also honoring what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want me to do. So, yeah. Boundary setting is really rough, especially in the beginning, because when you set boundaries with someone who previously there weren't boundaries for, the reaction can be very strong on their side. There's a lot of regulation, like emotional regulation, we have to learn how to do to interact with that so that we're not coming back at it with fire, right? The other thing that I would say is, if this is a situation that is taking up more space in your head than you would like it to, especially considering you have your own family, I'm assuming that means that you're married and a mom. You're busy enough, I'm sure. Seek support from someone who's a professional, who can walk you through this, who can be a listening ear, who can be a soundboard, who can give you tailored advice based on what you are experiencing. Whether that is a therapist, whether that is a counselor, a psychologist, whether that is a coach that you trust, I don't care who it is that you choose to go with, but someone who's going to be able to be the critical eye. Sometimes when we're making the decisions on our own, there are a lot of things that we miss because we're clouded by our emotions, and that affects our judgment. And the last thing that I will, or the last two things that I will say, inshallah, is radical empathy in situations like this is also really important, even though it can feel really icky. And it's easy to, oftentimes in situations when there's trauma and I say something like this, and I have a trauma group coaching program. I'll talk about it after I finish answering this question. The reason why radical empathy is so powerful is not because it excuses, is not because it justifies the action that was enacted towards you, but rather because it now paints the story for us to have greater understanding. And sometimes as a result of that, it helps lessen the pain and the hurt, right? And because now we can kind of get where it might have come from. With that being said, explore the possibilities, if you're willing to, of why maybe your adopted father didn't bond with you in the way that you might have hoped for or expected, right? This is just for the sake of humanizing, and it helps you with your healing journey. Again, it's not to justify on his side. I think if we're truly going to be serious about our healing, we have to be willing to kind of look at it from that perspective. You'd be amazed at how freeing it can be. And I say this as someone who had to do this in a situation that was very, very painful. And many times in many situations that were very painful. And I hated it. But the reality of it was, when I was able to tell the story of that person who caused so much harm to me in a way that helped me understand it more, it stopped being just an evil, harmful person and started being a person who was severely misguided, who needed to do better, and who did wrong things, but they don't own me anymore. So I hope that makes sense, inshallah. The other side is even just like exploring, why would he want to save face in front of his new family? What does that mean to him? Does he come from a culture where that's really important? Is it something in regards to his own self-validation he's looking for? To explain is not to justify, but that information can be really helpful on your healing journey. And I think this last thing that I do just want to say for any of us, inshallah, in a situation, oftentimes when we look at the contribution of fathers, especially the non-emotional contribution, sometimes we overlook the provision that fathers do provide and the hard work that it truly is. And there are still emotional rights that they do have to fulfill 100%. But it's important though to also recognize and give thanks where thanks is due, while also being willing to hold accountable for things that maybe were rights that were overlooked. So I hope that that was a helpful way to go about this. I know it was a long-winded Bismillah. Yeah, I was gonna say Allahumma salli Muhammad. I know it's a long-winded way. I was just looking at comments. I know it's a long-winded way about going about the answer, but it's a sensitive situation when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about interpersonal relationships that are ruptured, especially ones that are almost lifelong. It needs to be approached sensitively, while also recognizing that as Muslims, we hold higher values. And so sometimes the things that we have to do for our healing are more uncomfortable than what it is that other people would recommend. So I'm going to jump in, inshallah, to the comments. I'm just looking at the comments right now, inshallah. So this was I think people fall in the trap that when making dua, they expect a yes response. Du'as are about thinking Allah and asking for guidance, have patience. Du'as have a multitude of possible purposes, but du'a just means to call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it might be that we call to him in gratitude, it might be that we call to him in need, it might be that we call to him for with the general request. But yes, patience is such a powerful and important thing to have when we're waiting for our answer. This is actually a helpful comment. So the inshallah dua, the inshallah hadith, right? The hadith about when you make dua, you should not say inshallah. That applies to dua. Yeah, we are instructed in the Quran. This is found in Surah Kahf. That when we intend as human beings to do something, then we should say inshallah. So, if I say I'm going to film a video after this, I should say inshallah, because that only happens by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so now let's go back to the question, inshallah, and some responses from our sister who shared the question. So she mentioned there is a primal wound. I forgot to include this, but my father does use a ton of religious guilt on me. My mother was the messenger between us. She was the glue that kept the family together. So then, alhamdulillah, I was right about the fact that when the passing of her mother did happen, it led to the rupture or the breakdown of what used to be a safety net for her. And that's 100% going to build up a lot of pain and resentment. And when it comes to the point of religious guilt, there's something that's really, it dissolves away at a level of safety that a lot of us need. And the reason I say that is because the safest relationship that we can have is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I say safest relationship, I mean where we feel the most protected, the most comfortable, it's easiest for us to be vulnerable, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our heart and he knows where we are and he knows our need, right? It is the safest, emotionally safest relationship that you can have as a human being. Nothing can top that, not the relationship with our mother, not the relationship with our spouses, not the relationship with our friends. So when people are dissolving at it with religious guilt and religious trauma, it breaks down and affects that relationship to an extent, and it starts to allow unsafety to bleed in. And to heal trauma, we need safety. To avoid and prevent trauma, we need safety. It is quite literally our nervous system needs a sense of safety, so it's not knocking us into constant fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So it's thank you for sharing it. She mentioned she's also was able to manage a lot of his toxic negative traits. Now they are in full blown view aimed at me. So it looks like, she may have been the target of some sort, or what used to diffuse those attacks in a way. So yeah, I think really what I was talking about when it comes to boundary setting is going to be really important in this situation. For my father, it would actually work best it would actually work best if he holds no obligations right over me due to his toxic nature. So someone mentioned to go no contact. Your health in relationship with Allah is your priority. No boundaries means you take control of when you wish to see him. Okay, so this has brought up a lot of commentary, inshallah, and some things that we do have to be very mindful of. So with that being mentioned, someone says parents do not own children. I know this is a controversial comment, but I'm saying this in a supporting manner. In the sense of there's a difference between ownership and having rights. While Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who owns us and we are a gift to our parents, we are an amana to them and we are also a test to them. They do have certain rights over us, and those rights are in the Quran. They are rights that have been echoed by the Prophet ﷺ, and I've spoken in previous episodes because we always end up having a question about parents and just issues around parents, that we have to understand that upholding those rights of our parents is not about our parents, it is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And there are ways to go about it where you are fulfilling your obligation but also protecting yourself. But in a situation with born parents, no contact except in very, very, very strenuous circumstances, which you would need to sit down and speak to a scholar about. No contact is not something that Islam necessarily allows. This is a bit of a different situation because this is not a born parent. But then again, you're saying I've considered no contacts, but I know, and also Hana previously mentioned, the cutoff culture is extremely haram. I want to know the ruling first, inshallah. I cannot give you the ruling on the cutoff side of things for an adopted parent because honestly, I'm not a scholar of fiqh to know these things. I would sit down if you can reach a scholar. There are also ones you can ask online. By the way, like there are forums where a scholar will answer back. If you just look up Google Ask an Islamic Scholar, or go to your local masjid or call them and try to make an appointment with the imam. When I see something like this and I think about, this is my personal bias. What I'm about to say is nothing to do with my advice. It's just it's what I'm saying, and I could be very, very off. But I just think about someone who had their hand in supporting and raising another person for so long to do such a strong cutoff, even if it was Islamically allowed, which again, I'm not certain in the case of an adopted father. It's just something I would think very deeply about, because the consequences of a cutoff, it burns the hole further, versus setting boundaries, which says I'm still going to maintain a relationship, but we are going to adjust the relationship so that there's mutual respect in that. I'm also protecting my mental well-being. And also, I'm curious to know, like with your children, I mean, they might see this. Do they see this as their grandfather? That would also affect them in a sense. Okay, let's see. The comments are definitely popping off. This is a much longer episode than usual, but alhamdulillah. I hope that was helpful. I really do hope that was helpful and just supports you in your healing. Someone asked how to become emotionally independent of a man as a woman. I need more context to this question. Who is the man? Are we talking about someone that you have a crush on? Is this someone who there's a situationship? Is this a husband? Is this a husband who you're going through a divorce with? I think this question has a lot of different implications. Hey Hannah, can you add timestamps in the description of your old lives so people that want to rewatch can jump to their desired question? I'm gonna be so honest with you. No, it is a lot of effort to manage a channel as it is. I think a lot of people don't realize it, to go in and like have to find the timestamps for all these videos. I get a lot of requests. I don't have the mental energy to do it, quite frankly. If anyone wants to volunteer for me, I've been thinking about opening up a spot for someone to volunteer who could help with like setting up the episodes and things of that nature, but probably not anytime soon with the timestamps. No problem. People get my name wrong way too often. Someone said, I'm not a scholar, just a Muslim still and always learning. I just want to say it is normally haram to go no contact with bloodkin from what I know. Yeah, agreed. It is. We're not. I mean, the verses on this and the hadith on cutting ties with bloodkin, meaning your blood relatives, very, very harsh, scary, like declaring war on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that those who cut the a Allahumma salli Muhammad, an all-consuming like rhetoric for people, and it affects, because it has such a grip on people's empathy. It is hard for people to distinguish between right and wrong in that situation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them. So going off of the question, because women usually, how do you separate yourself emotionally from your man? Because women usually depend on men so much that they start compromising their principles for their husbands. I'll jump to that, but we'll just end with the question that we did answer. Alhamdulillah, I'm happy that I was helpful to you. Well, and then we'll talk about this about a bit. So Sister Mariam was talking about how do we separate ourselves emotionally from our husband. Let me go back to the original question. How do we become emotionally independent of a man as a woman? Because women usually depend on men so much that they start compromising their principles for their husbands. There is, inshallah, a video coming out about this in the future. And I think that, you know, the way marriage has been painted and the way the relationship between men and women, especially in the context of marriage, has been painted in Western societies, really has distorted the way we look at it as Muslim women. And the question, I think it's not that. I think the question has to be asked a different way, and I think we just have to be really careful. So how do we grow emotionally independent of someone? Well, in a marriage, there is a level of emotional dependence. So I think there's a difference between understanding how everyone should have a level of self-sufficiency, right? That's just part of being a functional human being, and being able to do things for yourself. But marriage comes with its vulnerability. We are, you know, the Quran describes the husband and wife as لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, right? You seek peace in them. That Allah put Rahman, Mawaddan, Rahmah, compassionate love and mercy between them two. That they are a garment for you and you are a garment for them. There is this interconnectedness and this interdependency. And there's a way to have the interdependency without it becoming codependency. And I think that what you're mentioning, or what your question is actually pointing to, is not how do we become independent of our husbands, because that's not what we should be trying to do. You shouldn't be independent of your husband or wife unless you're getting a divorce. But how do we not become codependent is the question. And, it's for those of you guys who are married and maybe who are watching this and would have something to add, feel free to add. If you are married, I think it is very important that there's an experiential level of this that has to be looked at as well. But I think that comes with a few different things. I think that comes with a level of self-esteem that was built up beforehand. I think it really comes with a strong relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you built up also before marriage. Or even if you built it up after marriage, but independently, in a sense where you understand that you have this time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that no one can take up with you. Having a sense of your own identity, meaning there are things that you like to do, there are things that, friends that you have, or people that you see that are separate from all the time you spend with your husband or wife. So you know how to spend time on your own as well. But there's nothing wrong with being emotionally dependent, in a sense, or financially dependent, or, physically dependent if your husband is the one moving things in the house or carrying heavy things up the stairs or whatever it might be. The language just needs to shift a little bit. Oh, thank you guys. I'm sorry. For some reason, thank you for letting me know that the voice was gone. Today might just be a weird Wi-Fi day because the signal was a little off. And so sometimes, because the microphone is connected to the camera, if the Wi-Fi goes out and the video lapses, it'll also affect the sound. All right. Ruby said a woman must have her own sense of self, a set of her own principles that she stands firmly on. The issue is when the husband has a controlling nature and tries to isolate the woman. Yeah, and I think in that situation, that's where the codependency side comes out. But that is a kind of an manifestation of a certain level of narcissism. I think that's a little different than the, by and large, what we see with most marriages. Okay, this is a really cool question. I'm gonna end the episode and then I'll answer this question, inshallah, because that's just my personal view on things. So there is a verse of the Quran that I wanted to share, and every now and then I do share a verse. Not every, at the end of every episode with these questions, I do share a verse that I feel speaks to a lot of the questions that were initially on, that we spoke about. So this is from Surah Nahl. So أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. And the translation is, indeed Allah commands justice. Grace, ihsan is more so excellence than grace, but grace, as well as generosity to close relatives. He forbids indecency, wickedness, and aggression. He instructs you so perhaps you will be mindful. So the reason that I chose this verse was, it was very all-encompassing, right? When we talk about the sister who asked the question about making dua for freedom from injustice, when we talk about the situation of the sister who is wanting to figure out what kind of relationship to have with her adopted father, the sister who talks about, being in a situationship, the viewer who mentioned that their parents are struggling with depression in a difficult, marriage, how to help. our job as Muslims is going to constantly be to uphold certain principles in our lives. Whether that is justice, meaning we keep, that sister keeps making dua, keep doing what you can for the people who are oppressed in our deen, or in the world. Ihsan being excellent in your behavior, seek to do what is best, what is most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you're not able to do that, then recognize at the very least that you put effort towards it, right? So this applies very strongly to the sister who's talking about her adopted father, right? He forbids indecency, wickedness, and aggression. And very often, as I mentioned even in the beginning when I was given that random rant about the brother on TikTok, is that when we are finding ourselves so strongly moved by emotion that we are willing to start possibly backbiting and slandering people, we have to pull ourselves back and say, am I allowing this tool of good to be something that the shaitan actually weaponizes against me? Because I'm the one who's going to be held accountable for it. And he instructs us to be mindful, to be thoughtful, to think about what we are doing. And truly, if we follow these principles in our lives, and at the end of the day, we are going to, inshallah, be of those who are constantly centering our lives on taqwa. And when you have taqwa, you are God conscious, you are, alhamdulillah, the life that you live, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will constantly free you from the struggles. This is from a verse of the Quran, not from my own personal opinion. So with that being said, you guys, the questions are now over. Thank you so much for those who were present. I will jump to the comments, but the episode has officially ended, so we'll jump to the comments, inshallah. Okay. So, Maryam mentioned especially women who are taught to please parents end up seeking that validation from their husbands too. You know, it's a slippery slope, right? I think because wa alaikum assalam, American Revert here. Thank you for all you are doing, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad if it's supporting you in your journey, inshallah. This is interesting, and it's where that self-criticism has to come in, right? And that radical accountability. Because we hear of a lot of violations and a lot of really difficult relationships between parents and children, and the way the rights of the parents can be abused, and like religious abuse, religious guilt, religious trauma, it's all very real. Sometimes we will create these sweeping suggestions because we think it's going to protect us from the harms that we might be experiencing or that others are experiencing. But Islam is about balance. And so there is an element of, yes, we should strive to please our parents 100%, because, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to lower the wings of mercy on our parents, to deal with them with ihsan, right? وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and to our parents, excellent treatment. But then we also are allowed to hold parents accountable for any harm that they may be doing towards their children. But we also don't let if our rights are not being fulfilled, we don't let that affect us fulfilling the rights of other people. It's like this interconnected system where we have to really think about how do we uphold the rights of other people, and what can we do to ensure our rights are being upheld. But we don't withhold rights as a punishment. Like that's not how we should go about it. When it comes to marriage, there is a certain level, and this is not my opinion, I mean, this is from the opinions of women who I've seen who've had incredible marriages, husbands who have had incredible marriages, from scholars who speak very balanced about this. When we walk into a marriage to a good person who genuinely does try their best, with this expectation of what are they going to do for me and how are they going to please me, and thinking about how we start rationing out our care for them and our service to them and our love to them. You put yourself you like set up a tournament between you and your spouse. It becomes a hockey field. It's not a marriage, because now you're counting points and you're thinking about it's becoming a transactional relationship. And that love bank, what is his name? Allahu Muhammad. There's a very, very famous marriage researcher, probably Gottman, Dr. Gottman, talks about the idea of a love bank, right? Where you're constantly depositing into the love bank of your husband or your wife, right? Your spouse. And so you do things that make them smile and make them laugh and make them feel seen and make them feel heard and loved and cared for. And that means pleasing them. And vice versa. And even if they don't do it to the same extent that you're doing it, your marriage, I mean, this is, before I got married, this is one of the advice that one of my older friends gave me. She's in her 40s. I think she has 3 kids right now. Alhamdulillah. And she said, Hannah, there's going to be times where things are going extremely well, and there are going to be times of conflict. And remember, in those times of conflict, that what you do is for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you do good for your husband, it is for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do it for Allah. Because your feelings over time may waver, but your commitment to the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never waver. So connect the emotion to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's of course nice when they appreciate it, but life gets in the way too. And we don't want us to be constantly subjected to our weakness is, as humans, honestly, is sometimes our emotion. So I these are just like random thoughts, and random reflections, but I hope, inshallah, I hope it's helpful. That's so cool. I'm so happy that so your video on period cycles came in the perfect time for me. Alhamdulillah, I'm happy. Someone had mentioned, like, why are you posting this so late? I'm like, I just gotta post it. It just has to go up. But I'm glad it was helpful. Someone mentioned sisterhood is a beautiful thing. We need more strength amongst our sisters. Support each other when applicable for noble causes, justified causes. The most beautiful bond is between sisters. Sadly, it's a delicate balance to respect your parents while holding them accountable, especially when you don't know your rights as a child. It really is. It's very, very delicate. But you know what? Also, think about it in the sense of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let those things go. So even if in the dunya we don't get our full rights by whoever it is we have a relationship with, you do what you can do to do what is pleasurable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let that be your benchmark. And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take care of the rest. And you know what? Work hard to make sure you're not the parents that you never wanted for yourself. Work hard to make sure that you're not the spouse that you never wanted for yourself. I think that that's an extremely empowering thing that we can do when you talk about like putting an end to generational traumas, especially in situations where parents and their parents' parents and parents' going up generations had certain norms of how they raised children that were very counter to Islam, but they were touted as Islam. What we can do is, even though we might have suffered through them, we go through our healing journeys, we become better versions of ourselves, and we think, how can I resolve to make sure that I do not repeat the same mistakes that they did to me with my own children? Because if you don't do that work, you will automatically regurgitate the same behavior, because that was what your mind was exposed to when you were younger. That becomes the only thing that you know, and that's what you automatically resort to. Someone said it's narcissistic abuse. That's where the trust in Allah is important. You are right. Once you are married, your attention is your spouse and kids, and it's unhealthy to put your in-laws and parents first. Narcissistic abuse is the whole other side of things. Please, if you're in a situation where you have a relationship where there's narcissistic abuse, bring in experts, bring in the scholars. It, it, the thing about it is that, right, especially in a marriage, that is a contract. It's a contractual relationship. Whereas parent child, like blood parent, blood child, it's not a contract. It's a tie of kinship. It's a different relationship. So if rights are being stepped on and not fulfilled in a contractual relationship like marriage, you have the right to say, I'm going to bring this to the governing body or whoever can, and you, if you want to initiate some sort of action, whether it's discussing a divorce, whether it's holding accountability, you have the right. And please don't ever think that I'm saying that you should overlook your abuses and for the sake of your marriage. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you're married to a good person and they're not, you should seek to be a good wife or husband to them. You should always think about how can I uphold the right of the other person, the rights of the other person, but also you have the absolute right to go and say, my rights are not being fulfilled, and I'm not okay with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most just. Someone asked a question. Again, these are just my opinions. This is not the coaching show. These are just my personal opinions. Let me see. Someone asked a question about like traditional roles. I'm trying to find that question. Oh, here it is. Someone said, do you think an Islamic marriage should have fully traditional roles in the sense that the woman must give the priority to her kids instead of her career? So, good question. Very good question. I think this is something that is very misunderstood in the online space, in the Muslim virtual world. So to fully traditional roles, I don't think a single person has like fully traditional roles in the modern world that we live in, even when we really try to, because it's a different world than the world the Prophet ﷺ lived in. But the husband in a situation like that Islamically has the responsibility of nafaqa, which is the provisions for their family. So that is his primary role. So if we were going to say what's traditional for a man, that is the traditional role. And a wife has the responsibility of her home and children. And that does not mean that you can't fill your space up with other things, or you can't have an alternative type of structure, so long that it is not neglecting the deen and the health and the safety of your family, and especially your children. So it's so that's the way I look at it, right? If you're talking about me, what my ideal as henna is, I inshallah want to be home with my children. I know the kind of person I am. I'm very caregiving. I don't dream of labor, of like going out and working and getting a check and coming home, and it's the most exciting thing to me. But at the same time, we live in sometimes I wonder if people think about this. We have so much technology, time-saving technology nowadays, that there's a lot of time left for mothers who are with their children, who often want to fill that up with other things. And so like the women who are around me who are incredible mentors and incredible mothers, some of them worked while their children are at school, some of them had their own at-home businesses, some did volunteering. You should still find a way to do things also that fulfill you in that time. Someone says sourdough bread juicing and crocheting over here. But that's a decision to come between a husband and a wife when they have children about how they want to go about it. I feel like we live in a society where it really, it forces women into a corner, right? You have women who are guilted for staying home, right? Especially, God forbid, you have a higher level degree, and then you decide that you want to stay home with your kids. The level of like fire, not criticism, fire that those women come under. You're destroying the rights of women everywhere. You're pushing us back. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. If you see a woman demonstrating like traditional roles, cooking, cleaning, that's looked down upon, which blows my mind, because why are we looking down at someone who's genuinely just wanting to serve and love their family in that way? But then all of a sudden there's this fire that women who are actually going about it very responsibly, if they work in a way that does not neglect their children, right? They're being told that they're doing something wrong, and it's just a lot more complex than that. And also there are a lot of women, by the way, who don't work because they want to. They work because they have to, because maybe their husbands are not making enough, or maybe their husbands are not doing the responsibility of providing. I've actually seen that situation a lot, where he just refuses to work, and in order to make sure that the lights stay on and the children are fed, a woman has to work. Or there are women who are single moms and their husbands don't provide financially, or their ex-husbands or children's fathers don't provide financially, and so they're working to make sure that, again, their kids are clothed and fed, and the house, the lights on at home stay on. So it's a lot more complex. For some reason, we think it's just a one-dimensional side of things. Humans really did get very confused. All right, you guys, it's been a long day. Alhamdulillah. I have a house to get back to cleaning because it is messy. I was not feeling well last evening, so I left a lot of the chores for today. That's a really good point. After all of these discussions, it looks like Islam is a middle point between red pill and feminism. What was I going to say? That's a good, yeah. Islam is a religion of balance, and you're allowed to have your opinions, obviously, right? Some would say that the ideal looks like this, and some will say that the ideal looks like that. But there's areas of gray that do exist in our deen, and with those areas, it's more so how do we apply the principles of deen? So, like, as an example with what we were talking about with your question about traditional roles, how do we make sure that the man is providing and the children are taken care of, and the primary responsibility of children? It's interesting, right? Because at least in the United States, for a lot of Muslims, their parents maybe came from an Islamic country. Now, this is obviously not the case with a lot of their people who are born Muslim, who might have been, for example, like descendants of slavery, and they've been in the U.S. for generations, and they're Muslim, so it doesn't always apply in that situation. The people who converted were born and raised in the U.S. and converted, so that's different. But as an example, for people who parents came from an Islamic country, then now you're in a society where Islam isn't the first thing that your children learn. And if we're prioritizing things outside of our children, we might neglect their Islamic education and understanding. And so when I was doing Islamic community organizing, this was a big complaint I had, because I was like, man, we're putting our children in Islamic schools thinking that it's going to help them develop right into good Muslims. But the reality is, you want the best way to develop your children to good Muslims is you're present and you're teaching them deen as well, and you're being the example, and they have a strong relationship with you as their parent, and then that leads to them having an example to look to. You see that with the Prophet ﷺ, with his daughters and his grandchildren, with Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, and how they ended up being. But if we're not present and we spend less time because we're occupied with other things of this world, and it's not by necessity, we lose that opportunity. So again, this is not me simplifying a very complex situation like other people might try to simplify it. There are a lot of reasons for why someone might choose one living situation versus another, but we have to think about what are the consequences of that. Thank you, Hannah. I'll be sending you an email to see how I can help and support you directly on this thing. Thank you so much. Let me know also what like experience you have too in different things related to social media, because that would be helpful. The topic is of self-tude and whether he has disgraced his fortitude or mocked her autonomy. In the third case, he hasn't been deemed unjustified. Wife approached him seeking validation. Oh, I'm not sure if you're speaking about another topic. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. Got it. You were talking to someone else. Okay. Their measuring yard for how good they are in any sphere of life is how much her husband is pleased with her, while she should seek this validation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you know what? There are hadith that talk about the importance of the pleasure of the husband towards his wife. But the funny thing is, for some reason, people neglect this other side of it, which is that the Prophet ﷺ says the best of you are the best to your wives. So it's just one of those things that very easily ends up getting used as a tool to subjugate women. And again, our deen is a deen of balance. Part of the reason why it's so important that we seek to support one another as husband and wife and to please one another as husband and as wife is because that is the marriage, and the marriage is a foundation for children. And then children become a family, and that family unit is the unit of society. And that's how Islam that's how Islam continues on in a society. And if we're disrupting the marriage, we ultimately disrupt the children. I talk a lot about this when it comes to trauma, right? Tons of experience in that. That is great to know. We'll send you my calendar link so I can listen to your specific goals and we can make connections from there. Inshallah, enjoy your homemaking for today. I will, inshallah. I definitely will. Thank you guys so much for being here. This was a much longer episode, but I think I just needed a bit of a chat to outside of what we typically talk about. With that being said, for all of you guys who are present, please make sure to like the live so that inshallah YouTube can push it out in the algorithm. Thank you for those of you guys who submitted your questions. If you're interested in submitting your questions, again, the link is in the description below. It doesn't guarantee that your question will be chosen, but if it is chosen, you'll get an email about it as well. I also would love to share with you guys about my trauma group coaching program for Muslim women. I do have a trauma group coaching program that is aimed to help support Muslim women on their journey healing from trauma. It is based on an Islamic framework, but with scientific evidence helping to shape the techniques. I am someone obviously who practices medicine, has a background in practicing psychiatry within family medicine and urgent care medicine, and so that definitely paints the way I go about this thing. If you are interested in this, then please know that the link to join the waiting list, because the application is not officially open for the next cohort, the link to join the waiting list is in the description as well, and you can find it in the description of any of my videos. Please check out that Laylatul Qadr video, and I will send you guys off inshallah with Assalamu alaikum. It was nice to meet all of you guys as well. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you guys.